Hey friends, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about Duolingo and learning Japanese. And for those who don't follow me on social media, I dyed my hair pink. It used to be black, it's pink now. Just wanted to address it before continuing with the video, but yes, my hair is a different color. So I know that Duolingo is kind of controversial in a way when it comes to learning languages. It's probably not the best learning tool to actually become fluent in certain languages, but I definitely think that it is one of the best apps in order to try and start learning a language, especially when you have no idea where to start. I also just want to say that this is not sponsored. I'm just making a video about an app that I think could be possibly useful to some people. So yeah, if you don't know where to start with learning a language, I find that Duolingo isn't a bad place to start. Now, a lot of people talk about how bad learning Japanese on Duolingo is, and it can be quite intimidating and also really confusing because of the way that Duolingo does it. You do learn hiragana first and then katakana, which are the two alphabets that you will learn before trying to tackle kanji. But the way that Duolingo structures this, they start throwing kanji into the mix very early on instead of, say, learning different words in hiragana solely and then moving on to kanji. They kind of mix it up a little bit so that you can recognize more common kanji that is used, and this is where it starts to get quite difficult and confusing. The hiragana aspect works, the katakana aspect works, but when they start throwing kanji at you, it can be very, very confusing, especially because that happens so early on, and that's why so many people quit Duolingo very early on when trying to learn Japanese. So this video is going to show you some tips and tricks you can use in order to use Duolingo to learn Japanese, because not everybody has other resources available to them, and Duolingo is free. There are other resources I use as well, which I will explain at the end of the video, but for the most part, we're going to focus on how to use Duolingo to your advantage to learn Japanese.
The first app I ever used to learn Japanese was Mirai Japanese. It's got a cute little penguin as its app image. This was back when Duolingo did not have Japanese on its app. Now, Mirai was pretty cool and it helped me learn a lot of key phrases, but it only got me so far, especially since its first few lessons are free and then after that you have to pay for a subscription. I find that Duolingo has really helped to drill hiragana and katakana into my head, and I'm sure if you use it every day, it'll help you just the same. My first tip in using Duolingo is to always take notes from the tips section on Duo. Most people just jump straight into it and then you're a bit confused about it all. Duo has a tips section that you can look at before starting a lesson. I always start with this when there's something new. I basically write out the tips in my notes, especially in the beginning. I basically wrote it out word for word, but writing it out helps your brain to remember it. We used to have this thing in school called look, cover, write, check. Basically, looking at something and then writing it off the top of your head will help you remember it. Even though we aren't covering because we're writing notes, writing this out just helps it sink into your brain and understand things before you start the lesson. Then, when you start the lesson, things will click, almost like watching a lecture and then doing the worksheet. It's just an extra thing to do that I find super helpful when learning. Otherwise, Duolingo really seems like it's pushing you into the deep end. My second tip is basically just write everything down. It kind of goes along with the first tip as well. When you're doing the lessons, write everything out. When they're teaching you different hiragana, write them out and their sounds. It'll help you remember and associate these. In the beginning, I would just write the same hiragana or katakana characters over and over again to remember them, especially ones that I would get wrong. If you're continuously writing things down, you can go back and see what you got wrong or would struggle on previously, making it easier to correct any mistakes. When I write these things down, I also like to color code my notes, so kanji, hiragana, and katakana can be easily noticed. Also, if I have any notes to add of my own to help me understand something better, this will be color coded too. My third tip is to write out the alphabet before you start your Japanese lesson. I had been learning Japanese for a little while before even realizing why hiragana and katakana are written out in the alphabet a certain way. I draw out the whole alphabet table before my Japanese lesson for the day, writing the vowels up the top and the consonant letters down the left-hand side, so I can read everything and remember. I find this super helpful, and it's like a little quiz for the day. I write out all the ones I know from memory and then attempt the ones I think I know but might not be sure about. And then I check them. This little practice device will make you remember these characters a lot more. My fourth tip is to ensure that you've got the hiragana and katakana down, but more specifically, the hiragana, before starting the other lessons that use kanji. The thing about Duolingo is that it'll start throwing some kanji into the mix, which will confuse you immediately when you start learning. But Duolingo is just like that, and it'll force you to learn kanji. Make sure you have headphones for these lessons, and you're listening to the sounds of the kanji as well, so you know what they are. If you've nailed down hiragana first, it makes learning kanji a lot easier. And every time a kanji comes up, I recommend writing it out a few times along with the hiragana for it. This is really great for learning and recognizing kanji, especially commonly used kanji like Nihon, or Nihongo, or Nihonjin. These are kanji that are easy to recognize because they are so commonly used. My final tip, and most important, is when learning from Duolingo or just learning Japanese in general, is don't write the sounds out in Romanji/English. But when you write a word out, such as ocha, which means tea, write the hiragana and then what that means. So you would write the hiragana letters for ocha, and then next to it you would write tea. Don't write out each sound in English. If you draw up your hiragana alphabet at the start of each lesson, you can refer back to it when you need to. Writing it out like this will force your brain to read the sounds instead of automatically going back to the English. Once I stopped writing out the English sounds and just wrote it out in Japanese with the translations, this changed how I learned Japanese. It allowed me to move forward faster than I had before, and my brain could suddenly absorb all of this. When I write out kanji, I'll write the hiragana next to it and then the English translation, such as the kanji for what, which is nani. I'll write the kanji, then the hiragana, na, ni, and then the English translation, what. This has really helped me to learn a lot of these basic kanji and helps throw me into it a little more without feeling lost. I also try to utilize all of the app as there is a practice hiragana and katakana section, which I try and use every lesson to just strengthen my knowledge. When I do these lessons, I do it without my notebook so I can focus on what is shown on the app. This helps my memory skills and helps me practice as if I'm talking to someone or trying to read and write Japanese in everyday life. I also attempt some of the Duolingo stories. I write out any words I don't know and its translation. These are a little bit more difficult, especially in the beginning, but they help to put some words and terms into perspective. So, those are my tips on using Duolingo to your advantage when learning Japanese. Japanese is quite hard for English users to learn as it's on the opposite scale to the English language. So, I know any tips can really help, but also finding a way to learn Japanese can be really hard. Whatever works for you, work with it. Others may learn differently, and that's okay. I'm still learning and I do use other tools to help learn Japanese, but a lot of those take a lot of self-discipline. And if my day is really busy, Duolingo makes it easier to continue learning.
So those are all my tips and tricks in order to use Duolingo to learn Japanese. I hope that they are helpful in some aspect. I find that they're quite helpful to me, and I haven't really seen other people discuss these particular things before, especially in regards to Duolingo, since most people just kind of kick it out the door and they're like, no, we're not using Duolingo. Which I understand because, you know, Duolingo is great when learning a lot of other languages, but when it comes to Japanese it can be very confusing, as we've previously stated. But again, some people only have this or don't know where else to start. So I think that Duolingo is a perfectly fine starting point, and it can be incredibly helpful if you have these tools. Let me know down below how you guys go with these tips and tricks in order to learn Japanese. Don't forget to like this video if you did like the tips and tricks as well. And you know, if you're into more otaku related content, then don't forget to subscribe. That is all for today's video. And yeah, I'll see you guys next week. Bye.